Hi again, it's Dr. Peter Bevan, GSZ572. This video is about giving guidance to your project concept development. So as I outlined in the early introductory video, this is the work that actually needs to scope, identify and put a boundary around the investigation you're going to undertake in the workplace project. As the name suggests, this must be a workplace project, so there are a number of concepts that actually apply, or contexts that apply here. The first is the nature of your engagement with the sponsor. So the sponsor may be your own employer. They may be a third-party sponsor. From our perspective, for the academic requirements, it doesn't matter, but you must have that sponsoring organisation, and it must be a live issue of importance to the executive who is in that organisation with whom you're engaging. The variety of projects you might actually undertake themselves take different forms. So at a first level, it may be for those participants that are defence related, they may very much have about a project acquisition, it may be in strategic procurement or project management leadership dimension. You will note that some of the material, the optional material in particular, is aimed at those scoped projects, particularly addressing things like benefits management and taking that to the next level, business model design for projects. So those sort of things you might find very much beneficial to those projects. Secondly is projects outside of that environment, outside of defence, so in industry and or government. Again, they are problem or opportunity based. So usually by describing them as a defined problem statement, it actually gives a real definitional context to what the scope of the project is going to be to start with. Apart from the environment within an organisation, we then also have the potential for new venture planning projects. So the outcome of that is, unlike a recommendations report, this is actually going to be a business plan. But again, in exactly the same way, it must be a live project, a live venture, and you must convince me that it is actually live. So if it's just an idea that you have, that's not sufficient. There must be demonstrated commitment that this is a venture that is going to progress to the next stage, whatever it may be. For both types of environments within an organisation or a new venture, the progression of those will very much be dependent on the nature and the investigation itself. So by definition, they will be very different. So there is enormous flexibility in the structure of this unit to cater for all project types. Apart from the environment and the context the project might apply to, there is also two broad options. So you can do them individual, where you as a student, you are engaging in the investigation, doing the work and actually delivering the outcomes, the outputs for assessment purposes and reviewed by the sponsor by yourself, or indeed it might be a group. Now a group is again, largely quite flexible. For organisational problems, operational in nature traditionally, it can range between 2 and 4. No more than 4. They will be very rare. And you need to think through in terms of how many people in the group relative to the effort you need to put into in the investigation and the delivery of the outcomes. For new venture plans, maximum of 4. I would suggest strongly that individuals who want to do a business plan, you will not have the bandwidth to be able to deliver to sufficient quality standard to be acceptable. I have allowed it in the past, but they have been by exception only. As a general rule for new venture plans, because of the amount of work and the depth of investigation you have to go through here, usually a minimum of 3 people, up to 4 will be the norm. So As you can see, the variety is quite significant, and it really is about what resonates with you. I would encourage you to think of it in terms of not only where the opportunity may lie, but also how it benefits your aspirations as a student post this program. So if you have aspirations of moving into the new venture, startup type environment, well, that might be fine. You might just have a broad interest in that for different reasons. Again, that's fine. Within your workplace, as a workplace project, it may be in your current area of work, but I'd also encourage you to look more broadly than that. It may be in another line of business, another business unit, another project area that you might have aspirations of going to post the project. So I would just encourage you to stretch your own boundaries as much as you can to take the next step. Don't sit in your comfort zone. One of the things I will look at in evaluating a project for approval is if I see it as something that you should be doing as part of your job anyway, I won't approve it. So it really does need to go to the next level. Importantly, in terms of sponsor, in your own workplace, the sponsor needs to be not a peer. It needs to be up at least one level in the hierarchy. An executive level is much preferable. So again, engaging at the appropriate level of sponsor to actually engage in a way that is actually going to stretch you and test your boundaries will be important. From a third-party sponsoring organisation perspective, it does have to be an executive sponsor from a CEO or C-suite. If they're not at that level, again, it is unlikely I will approve it. So if it's a startup, for example, if you haven't got the CEO's support, the founder's support, then it's unlikely approval will be given. So think that through. What actually resonates with you? Something that you can go the extra mile on, that will stretch your boundaries, and importantly, it's about two forms of value creation here. One is you have your academic requirements. Yes, we've got to tick the boxes there, but very much pushing yourself to have a focus on delivering value for your sponsor. Really have a focus on that as a business outcome, as distinct from just the academic outcome. So, how do we go about doing all this then? So we've got the nature and the context of what the project may be, whether it's individual, whether it's group. We have to have a starting point. So going back to that definitive problem statement, we need to have a boundary around this. If it is too broad, number one, you won't deliver sufficient value and you won't have a tightly defined scope of activity for your investigation that really allows substance. So it needs to be achievable in a relatively short period of time. So keep the time factor and the commitment that's required to deliver the outcome firmly in mind. It's not unusual that through the consultation process we need to bring that in a little bit so it is actually achievable for you and will be acceptable by the sponsor. So this is an iterative process. What I would strongly encourage you to do is once you have a project concept, email me with what that concept. I do not look for, actually not looking for war and peace here. This needs to be quite succinct. I would suggest that if you can come to me with a series of dot points that define a context, a problem statement, that is a sentence or a short paragraph, the 4, maximum 5 issues that might be underpinning that research problem, and what are the maximum of 3 specific research questions you are proposing to answer. If it's more than that, I would suggest that your scope is too broad. Less than that, depending on the nature of the project, it's probably not substantive enough. So as a guidance, I think if you can go through that, shoot me your first cut of that. We can have a conversation if need be. Where a 3 way conversation is needed with your sponsor, I'm more than happy to do that, to try to facilitate a consensus, because it is more norm than not that we do have to go through the iterative process, involve the sponsor in some conversation to try to get an appropriate boundary around the investigation. All of that work needs to be done prior to week 1 of the formal commencement of the unit. So understanding what that is, getting to that point of agreement in principle, so that now you can actually go and develop a project plan. So the project plan takes that as a starting point, but now fills in the gaps around your methodology you are going to apply in the context of your project to actually start the investigation. It will include things like data gathering, information gathering, the methodologies in terms of the thematic perspectives you are applying across the program, what's going to add value in that investigation, and the format of the deliverables. One of the sessions that we will have will be on research methodology to aid you, so we'll leave that to one of those content pieces. But as a starting point, I would very much encourage you to start early on that part of it. Look for the sponsor, identify the problem, scope it appropriately to have the right boundary, and shoot it off to me so that we can start that process and refine that as much as needed before commencement. I would encourage you not to be overly focused on the deliverables in the assessment criteria at this stage. So that can actually lead you down a path of producing the artefacts rather than what you need to do for the investigation itself. So that will come. So don't panic that it's not there yet. Really start early, think it through, and probably the number one thing I would make a recommendation on is that when you hit hurdles, when you hit barriers in the investigation, both from a scoping with your sponsor, but also when you start the unit, do not leave it to a crisis point to contact me. If you're not getting cooperation to get access to information and people, for example, as you require, hit it on the head early so that we can resolve it and work a way around it in negotiating with the sponsor. And sometimes time availability is the biggest enemy here, particularly of those people you need to engage with. So don't leave it to a crisis point. Do it early because the quality of what you deliver will suffer accordingly. We've learnt that one the hard way. So very much get in on the front foot, be proactive. So good luck with it, and I really do look forward to engaging with you as we go forward, and stretch yourself. Really look for those opportunities that are going to deliver both ways, and have fun with it. Good luck. Cheers. Done. Done.